Kim Jong Un's aunt disappeared in 1998, and the North Korean government spent years searching for her. When the CIA finally found her hiding in America, what she told them about the Kim family changed everything we thought we knew about the world's most secretive regime. The stories she shared were so shocking that intelligence agencies had to completely rewrite their profiles on North Korea's leadership. Her name is Ko Young-suk, and for 13 years she lived inside the heart of North Korea's ruling family. She helped raise Kim Jong-un from the time he was a baby. She watched him grow up, saw his temper tantrums, knew his fears and dreams, and understood the family dynamics that shaped him into the dictator he is today. Then one day in 1998, she made a decision that could have gotten her killed. She packed a bag, grabbed her husband and daughter, and ran. They fled across multiple countries, constantly looking over their shoulders, until they finally landed in the United States, where they've been hiding ever since. What she revealed in her interviews with intelligence agencies and journalists gives us a rare glimpse into a world that very few people ever see, and even fewer live to talk about. Here's the problem with understanding North Korea. Almost everything we know comes from satellite images, intercepted communications, and defector testimonies from regular citizens who lived under the regime but never had access to the inner circle. We can see what North Korea wants us to see, and we can hear from people who experienced the brutality of the system, but the actual family running the country has always been a complete mystery. What do they think? How do they make decisions? What are they really like when the cameras are off? Ko Young-suk is one of maybe 5 people in the entire world who can answer these questions and is willing to talk about it. She married Kim Jong-il's younger brother, Ko Young-song, which made her part of the Kim family by marriage. But more importantly, she became Kim Jong-il's trusted caregiver for his children. When Kim Jong-un was born in 1984, Ko Young-suk was there. When he took his first steps, she was there. When he started showing the personality traits that would later define his rule, she was there watching it all happen. The challenge for intelligence agencies and journalists has always been getting access to someone like her. The Kim family keeps their inner circle incredibly small and incredibly loyal. People who work closely with the family know that betrayal means death, not just for them, but for their entire extended family back in North Korea. The regime has a policy of 3-generation punishment, meaning if you defect or betray the leadership, your parents, your siblings, your children, even your grandchildren can be sent to prison camps or executed. So when Ko Young-suk fled North Korea with her family, she wasn't just risking her own life, she was condemning relatives she left behind to terrible fates. The North Korean government searched for her desperately because they knew she had information that could damage the carefully constructed image of the Kim family. For years after her escape, nobody knew where she was. The regime looked for her in China, in Southeast Asia, in Europe. They never imagined she had made it all the way to the United States. She arrived in America in 1998 and immediately went into hiding. She didn't contact the authorities, she didn't reach out to journalists, she and her family just disappeared into American society, living under assumed names, working regular jobs, trying to blend in and stay invisible. This worked for years. She successfully stayed hidden while building a new life far away from the nightmare of North Korea. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2013, Ko Young-suk's nephew, Kim Jong Un, had just taken power after his father died. The world was trying to figure out who this young leader was and what he might do. Intelligence agencies were scrambling for any information about his background, his personality, his decision-making process. And that's when someone finally tracked down Ko Young-suk living quietly in New York. The challenge then became getting her to talk. She had spent 15 years successfully staying hidden and silent. She knew that speaking publicly would put a target on her back. North Korea had already tried to assassinate other high-profile defectors. Why would she risk everything by giving interviews? What could possibly motivate her to share what she knew about the Kim family after maintaining silence for so long? Let me take you back to the beginning of Ko Young-suk's story so you can understand how she ended up in this position. She was born in North Korea in the early 1950s, right around the time of the Korean War. She grew up in the system, went to school, and was educated in the regime's ideology like everyone else. She was a regular citizen, not particularly connected to power or privilege. Then she met Ko Young-song. He was the younger brother of Kim Jong-il, which made him part of the most powerful family in the country. Now, you might think that being related to the supreme leader would be an amazing position, but it's actually more complicated than that. Yes, you get privileges that regular North Koreans could never dream of: access to good food, nice housing, imported goods, the ability to travel. But you also live under constant scrutiny and pressure. One wrong move, one statement that could be interpreted as disloyal, and you could fall from grace completely. Ko Young-song was aware of this precarious position. He wasn't in line for power. That was his older brother Kim Jong-il's path. So Ko Young-song tried to stay useful and stay out of trouble. When he married Ko Young-suk, she became part of this delicate balancing act. She had to be loyal to the family, follow all the rules, and never give anyone a reason to question her dedication to the regime. Her big opportunity came when Kim Jong-il started having children with different women. The Kim family structure is complicated because Kim Jong-il had multiple relationships and didn't always follow traditional marriage customs. He had children with different partners, and these children needed to be raised and educated in ways that would prepare them for potential leadership roles. Kim Jong-il trusted his younger brother and sister-in-law to help with this task. So Ko Young-suk became a caregiver and teacher for Kim Jong-il's children. This put her in an incredibly unique position. She wasn't just an employee or servant, she was family. She had direct access to the children during their most formative years. She saw them every day, dealt with their problems, taught them lessons, and observed how they were being shaped by their environment and upbringing. Kim Jong Un was born on January 8, 1984, though for years his exact birth date was kept secret even from most North Koreans. He was the second son of Kim Jong-il and Ko Young-hui. His older brother, Kim Jong-nam, was born to a different mother, and his younger brother, Kim Jong-chul, was born just a couple years after him. These three boys were potential heirs to the North Korean leadership, though nobody knew at the time which one would eventually take power. Ko Young-suk spent more time with these children than almost anyone except their parents. She described Kim Jong-un as a regular kid in many ways when he was young. He played, he laughed, he got into trouble like kids do. But she also saw early signs of the person he would become. He had a temper. When things didn't go his way, he would throw massive tantrums. He expected people to obey him immediately and got angry when they didn't. One story she shared really illustrates this. When Kim Jong-un was around 5 or 6 years old, he became obsessed with basketball after watching NBA games on smuggled videotapes. The Kim family had access to Western media and entertainment that was completely forbidden to regular North Koreans. Kim Jong-un particularly loved watching Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. He wanted to play basketball constantly. Ko Young-suk said that when Kim Jong-un was playing basketball, everyone around him had to let him win. If someone blocked his shot or scored against him, he would fly into a rage. He would scream, throw the ball, refuse to keep playing. The adults around him learned quickly that it was easier to just let the young prince win every game, rather than deal with his anger. This might seem like a small thing, but think about what it teaches a child. It teaches them that they should always win, that other people exist to serve them, and that anger is an effective tool for getting what you want. This pattern repeated across every aspect of his childhood. Kim Jong-un was told from his earliest memories that he was special, that his family was chosen by history to lead the Korean people, that he was superior to everyone around him. Regular children grow up learning to share, to lose gracefully, to consider other people's feelings. Kim Jong-un grew up learning the opposite. He was the center of the universe, and everyone else orbited around him. Ko Young-suk also described the intense education that Kim Jong-un received. He had private tutors who taught him Korean history from the regime's perspective, which meant learning a completely fabricated version of events where the Kim family were heroes who single-handedly defeated Japan, founded North Korea, and created a paradise for the people. He learned about military strategy and weapon systems. He studied political theory focused on the Juche ideology that his grandfather created. But here's something interesting that Ko Young-suk revealed. Kim Jong-un's education also included a lot of Western content that would shock most people. He watched Hollywood movies regularly. He played video games. He had access to computers and the internet, though in a carefully controlled way. The regime wanted him to understand the outside world, even while they were telling the North Korean people that the outside world was evil and inferior. This created an interesting dynamic in Kim Jong-un's worldview. He knew that the propaganda his government spread to the people wasn't completely accurate. He had seen with his own eyes that America and other Western countries weren't the hellscapes that North Korean media portrayed. But he was also raised to believe that this outside world was a threat that needed to be kept at bay, and that his family's iron grip on North Korea was necessary to protect the country. When Kim Jong-un was around 8 years old, his father made a decision that would significantly impact his development. He decided to send Kim Jong-un to school in Switzerland under a false identity. This was an incredible risk in some ways, but Kim Jong-il believed his son needed exposure to international education and culture to become an effective leader. So, in 1996, Kim Jong-un was sent to Switzerland along with his older brother Kim Jong-chul. Ko Young-suk and her husband were chosen to accompany the boys and look after them during their time abroad. This is how Ko Young-suk ended up living in Switzerland, which ultimately made her escape possible. But before we get to that, let me tell you what she observed during those years in Switzerland. Kim Jong-un attended a regular public school in Bern using the name Pak Un. His classmates didn't know he was the son of the North Korean dictator. They just thought he was the son of a North Korean diplomat. Ko Young-suk said that Kim Jong-un struggled to fit in at first. He spoke limited English and German. His social skills were underdeveloped from growing up in the isolated bubble of the Kim family compound. He was used to everyone treating him like royalty, and suddenly he was just another student. But he adapted over time. He made friends, particularly bonding with other kids over basketball. He was apparently very passionate about basketball and would play whenever he could. His teachers remember him as a quiet student who didn't cause trouble but also didn't stand out academically. He was average in most subjects, though he had interest in computers and technology. Ko Young-suk watched Kim Jong-un navigate this strange situation where he was living a double life. At school, he was Pak Un, a normal teenager. At home with Ko Young-suk and her family, he was still the North Korean prince who expected special treatment. She described him switching between these two modes, and she noticed that the longer he stayed in Switzerland, the more he seemed to prefer the freedom and normalcy of his school life over the rigid expectations of his role back home. She also revealed something that the North Korean government would hate people to know. Kim Jong-un developed a love for Western culture during his time in Switzerland. He loved American action movies. He collected Nike shoes. He ate at McDonald's. He went to amusement parks and concerts. For a few years, he got to experience what life was like for a normal person in a free society, even though he was always aware that his real identity was hidden and his real life was waiting for him back in North Korea. During this time in Switzerland, Ko Young-suk said she could see Kim Jong-un's personality developing in ways that concerned her. He could be charming and friendly when he wanted something, but he had a calculating side, even as a young teenager. He would manipulate situations to his advantage. He held grudges. If someone crossed him or embarrassed him, he wouldn't forget it. She saw these traits and wondered what kind of leader he would become if he ever took power. Then, in 1998, something happened that changed everything for Ko Young-suk and her family. Her husband, Ko Young-song, had a disagreement with someone back in North Korea. The details of this conflict have never been fully revealed, but it was serious enough that Ko Young-song became worried about their safety. He knew how the regime dealt with people who fell out of favor. They would be recalled to North Korea under some pretense, and then they would disappear into the prison system or worse. Ko Young-song received orders to return to North Korea. He was told to bring his family. This is the moment when Ko Young-suk and her husband had to make the most difficult decision of their lives. They could obey the orders, go back to North Korea, and hope that everything would be fine, or they could run, which would make them traitors in the eyes of the regime and put their extended families back home in terrible danger. They chose to run. Ko Young-suk packed up what they could carry. They told Kim Jong Un and the other children that they were going on a short trip. Then they left Switzerland and started a journey that would eventually take them to the United States. They couldn't go directly there because they needed to get travel documents and figure out how to enter the country without drawing attention. They spent time in several different countries, always worried that North Korean agents were looking for them. Ko Young-suk has said that leaving was one of the most painful decisions she ever made because she knew what it would mean for family members she left behind. Her parents, her siblings, anyone connected to her would face punishment. The regime would want to make an example of them to discourage others from defecting. She carried the guilt of that knowledge with her, but she also believed that staying would have meant certain death for her immediate family. When they finally made it to the United States in 1998, they disappeared completely. They settled in a city in New York and started over with nothing. Ko Young-suk had to learn English properly. She had to find work. She had to navigate American society and culture. And she had to do all of this while staying hidden from anyone who might recognize her or report her presence to North Korean intelligence. For years, this strategy worked perfectly. Ko Young-suk lived a quiet, normal American life. She had a regular job. She paid her taxes. She became part of her local community. Nobody around her had any idea about her past or her connection to the Kim family. She watched from afar as events unfolded in North Korea, probably wondering about the children she had helped raise and what had become of them. Then, in December 2011, Kim Jong-il died suddenly from a heart attack. His youngest son, Kim Jong Un, the boy Ko Young-suk had helped raise, was announced as the new supreme leader of North Korea. The world was shocked because Kim Jong Un was only 27 years old and relatively unknown. Intelligence agencies scrambled to gather information about this young leader who now controlled a nuclear-armed nation. This is when someone finally tracked down Ko Young-suk. The details of how she was found have never been made fully public, but apparently intelligence officials or journalists managed to locate her living in the New York area. They approached her carefully because they knew she had been hiding for good reason. They offered her protection and assured her that speaking out would actually make her safer, because if North Korea tried to harm her, it would draw international attention. Ko Young-suk was hesitant at first. She had maintained silence for 13 years. Why break that now? But as she watched news coverage of Kim Jong-un taking power and saw the international community struggling to understand who he was, she apparently felt a responsibility to share what she knew. She had information that could help the world understand the person now leading North Korea, and maybe that information could somehow make a difference. In 2013, Ko Young-suk gave her first interviews. She spoke to American intelligence officials first, giving them detailed information about Kim Jong-un's childhood, his personality, his education, and the family dynamics she had observed. Then she spoke to a few carefully selected journalists who published her story. The revelations from these interviews were fascinating because they painted a much more detailed picture of Kim Jong-un than anyone had before. Ko Young-suk described him as someone who had always expected to be important, but probably didn't expect to become the supreme leader at such a young age. His older brother, Kim Jong-nam, had been the presumed heir for years, but he had fallen out of favor with their father. The middle brother, Kim Jong-chul, was considered too soft and passive for leadership. So Kim Jong-un got the position somewhat by default, being the youngest but most aggressive and ambitious of the three brothers. Ko Young-suk said that this probably contributed to his insecurity as a leader. He was young, he hadn't been prepared for the role as thoroughly as an heir normally would be, and he had to establish his authority quickly to prevent challenges from older generals and officials who might not take him seriously. This insecurity, according to Ko Young-suk, helps explain some of Kim Jong-un's behavior in his early years as leader.
He purged dozens of high-ranking officials, including his own uncle Jong Un, who was executed in 2013. He accelerated North Korea's nuclear weapons program and conducted more missile tests than his father and grandfather combined. He presented himself as strong, decisive, and willing to use violence to maintain control. Ko Young-suk also revealed details about Kim Jong-un's personal life that humanized him in some ways while also being disturbing. She described him as someone who genuinely loves his country in his own way, but has a completely warped understanding of what's good for North Korea. He believes that maintaining the Kim family's absolute control is necessary for the nation's survival. He sees any form of opening or reform as existential threats that could lead to the regime's collapse. She talked about his relationship with his father, Kim Jong-il, describing it as distant and formal. Kim Jong-il was not a warm or affectionate parent. He saw his children primarily as potential successors who needed to be molded into leaders. Ko Young-suk said that Kim Jong-un desperately wanted his father's approval and worked hard to prove himself worthy of inheriting power. This drive for paternal approval continued even after Kim Jong-il's death, with Kim Jong-un trying to live up to what he imagined his father would want. One of the most interesting things Ko Young-suk revealed was about Kim Jong-un's view of the outside world. Because he had lived in Switzerland and experienced Western culture firsthand, he wasn't ignorant about how other countries lived. He knew that people in South Korea, Japan, America, and Europe had better living standards than North Koreans. He had tasted that life himself. But Ko Young-suk said he rationalized this by believing that external freedoms came at the cost of social stability and traditional values. In Kim Jong-un's worldview, as Ko Young-suk described it, North Korea's poverty and isolation were acceptable sacrifices to maintain independence and ideological purity. He had been taught that previous socialist countries like the Soviet Union collapsed because they compromised and allowed Western influence to corrupt them. He was determined not to make the same mistake. Better to keep North Korea poor and isolated than to risk the regime's survival by opening up. Ko Young-suk also shared observations about the other people around Kim Jong-un and how the power structure worked within the Kim family. She described Kim Jong-il's sister, Kim Kyung-hui, who was married to Jong Song-taek, as an ambitious and ruthless woman who had significant influence over her brother.
Kim Kyung-hui had helped groom Kim Jong-un for leadership after it became clear he was the chosen successor. But Ko Young-suk said the relationship between Kim Jong-un and his aunt deteriorated after he took power. Kim Kyung-hui and her husband Jang Song-taek were seen as trying to exercise too much control over the young leader. They treated him like he was still a child who needed guidance. This infuriated Kim Jong-un, who wanted to establish that he was fully in charge. The execution of Jang Song-taek in 2013 was partly about eliminating a political rival, but Ko Young-suk suggested it was also about Kim Jong-un sending a message to his aunt and anyone else who might underestimate him. She described the North Korean elite as deeply paranoid and constantly competing for favor with the leadership. Everyone watches everyone else for signs of disloyalty or ambition. Friendships are dangerous because your friend today could be purged tomorrow, and any association with them could taint you. The culture at the top of North Korean society is one of fear and mistrust, which makes it incredibly difficult for anyone to organize opposition or even suggest reforms. Ko Young-suk revealed that this paranoia extended to how information was controlled even within the elite class. Yes, high-ranking officials and Kim family members had access to foreign media and information that regular North Koreans could never see. But they were still expected to maintain complete loyalty to the regime's ideology in their public statements and actions. Getting caught privately criticizing the leadership or expressing doubts about the system could result in severe punishment. She also talked about the extreme personality cult around the Kim family and how it was maintained. From the earliest age, North Korean children are taught that Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un are perfect beings who can do no wrong.
The propaganda is so pervasive that many North Koreans genuinely believe it. They see the Kim leaders as almost godlike figures who care about the people and are guiding the nation toward prosperity, even as they live in poverty. Ko Young-suk said that maintaining this cult of personality requires constant effort and resources. There are government departments dedicated to managing the Kim family's image. Every photograph is carefully staged. Every public appearance is meticulously planned. Nothing is left to chance because any crack in the facade could undermine the entire system. She revealed some interesting details about how Kim Jong Un prepared for his role as supreme leader. In the years before Kim Jong-il's death, Kim Jong-un underwent intensive training. He studied military tactics and spent time with different military units learning how the armed forces operated. He was taught the regime's official history and ideology by the most senior scholars. He practiced public speaking and learned how to conduct meetings with officials. But Ko Young-suk said there were aspects of leadership that Kim Jong-un wasn't fully prepared for because his father's death came unexpectedly. Kim Jong-il had planned to have more time to groom his son and introduce him gradually to the full responsibilities of power. Instead, Kim Jong-un was suddenly thrust into total control while still in his late 20s with limited experience.
This lack of preparation showed in some of his early decisions as leader. He made purges that were probably too aggressive and destabilized parts of the government. He provoked international tensions with missile tests and threats that boxed North Korea into a corner diplomatically. Over time, he seemed to learn and adapt, becoming more calculated and strategic. But Ko Young-suk suggested that his first few years in power were marked by insecurity and overcompensation. One of the most valuable things Ko Young-suk provided to intelligence agencies was insight into Kim Jong-un's decision-making process and psychological profile. She helped them understand what motivated him, what his fears were, and how he might react to different types of pressure or incentives. This information became crucial for policymakers trying to deal with North Korea's nuclear program and aggressive behavior. Ko Young-suk described Kim Jong-un as someone who responds to strength and views compromise as weakness. In his worldview, shaped by his upbringing and the regime's ideology, the world is divided into winners and losers. Countries that compromise or show weakness get dominated by stronger powers. North Korea survived this long by being tough and refusing to back down, and Kim Jong-un believes continuing that approach is essential. This perspective helps explain why North Korea has rejected various offers of aid and engagement from the international community over the years. From the outside, it seems irrational to choose poverty and isolation over accepting help and opening up. But from Kim Jong-un's perspective, as Ko Young-suk described it, accepting help would create dependence on other countries and give them leverage to demand changes. Better to be poor and independent than comfortable and controlled. She also revealed that Kim Jong-un has a deep paranoia about being overthrown or assassinated. He has seen what happened to other dictators like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, who were toppled and killed. He believes that giving up nuclear weapons or opening up politically would make him vulnerable to the same fate. The nuclear program isn't just about international prestige or military capability. It's his life insurance policy that he thinks will deter any foreign intervention aimed at removing him. Ko Young-suk talked about the relationship between Kim Jong-un and his wife Ri Sol-ju, revealing that even this personal relationship was largely arranged for political purposes. Ri Sol-ju was selected from among several candidates who were considered suitable matches for the young leader. She came from a good family, was attractive and educated, and had training in music and performance. The marriage was designed to present Kim Jong-un as a modern leader with a sophisticated first lady, contrasting with his father who had multiple informal relationships. But Ko Young-suk suggested that Ri Sol-ju has limited real influence over policy or decisions. She serves primarily as a public relations asset, appearing at events and helping soften Kim Jong-un's image.
Behind the scenes, the real power dynamics involve military leaders, party officials, and members of the Kim family who have been in the system for decades. Another fascinating revelation from Ko Young-suk involved the relationship between Kim Jong-un and his older brother Kim Jong-nam, the one who was eventually assassinated in Malaysia in 2017. She said that even when they were children, there was tension between them. Kim Jong-nam was the oldest and initially the presumed heir, but he was also more cosmopolitan and interested in the outside world than his father wanted. Kim Jong-nam fell out of favor after he was caught trying to enter Japan on a fake passport in 2001, apparently to visit Tokyo Disneyland. This embarrassed the regime and showed poor judgment. He was essentially exiled after that, living in Macau and other places outside North Korea. Ko Young-suk said that Kim Jong-un viewed his older brother as weak and unworthy of leadership, which created resentment on both sides. When Kim Jong-nam was killed by assassins using VX nerve agent in Kuala Lumpur airport in 2017, most analysts assumed Kim Jong-un ordered the hit to eliminate a potential rival. Ko Young-suk's testimony supported this theory. She said that Kim Jong-un would view his brother's existence as an ongoing threat because other countries or dissidents could potentially try to install Kim Jong-un as a rival leader. Even though Kim Jong-nam showed no interest in power, his mere existence was dangerous from Kim Jong-un's perspective. Ko Young-suk also provided details about the daily life inside the Kim family compounds that gave a sense of the bizarre bubble they lived in. She described massive mansions with every luxury imaginable, imported goods from around the world, private beaches and ski resorts, collections of expensive cars, and basically unlimited resources, while the country around them struggled with poverty and famine. The Kim family compounds were like self-contained kingdoms with their own security forces, staff, and infrastructure. Regular North Koreans could never get anywhere near these places. Even high-ranking officials only entered when specifically invited. Ko Young-suk said the disconnect between the Kim family's lifestyle and the reality of most North Koreans' lives was total. They lived in completely different worlds despite being in the same country. She described meals that would include fresh seafood, imported beef, exotic fruits, fine wines, and elaborate desserts, while most North Koreans were surviving on corn porridge and kimchi if they were lucky. The Kim family would watch movies in private theaters, play on golf courses built just for them, and vacation at luxurious properties while teaching the population that their poverty was noble sacrifice for the revolution. Ko Young-suk said this hypocrisy didn't seem to bother the Kim family members at all. They genuinely believed they deserved these privileges because of their special role in history. They saw themselves as working hard to guide the nation, and the luxuries were appropriate rewards for their service. The cognitive dissonance that would strike most people didn't exist for them because they had been raised in this bubble where their superiority was treated as natural and right. One detail that Ko Young-suk shared that really stuck with people was about Kim Jong-un's health. Even when he was a teenager, he was overweight and had poor eating habits. He loved rich food, particularly Swiss cheese and other Western delicacies he had enjoyed during his time in Switzerland. Ko Young-suk worried even then about his health and whether he was developing diabetes or heart problems. This observation proved prescient because Kim Jong-un's health has been a subject of international speculation throughout his time as leader. He has visibly gained weight over the years and has occasionally disappeared from public view for weeks at a time, leading to rumors about health crises. Ko Young-suk's testimony confirmed that these health concerns weren't just speculation, but reflected long-standing issues with his lifestyle. She also revealed information about Kim Jong-un's children, though she was careful not to provide too many details that might put them at risk. Apparently, Kim Jong-un has 2 or 3 children with his wife Ri Sol-ju, though the regime keeps information about them highly secret. Ko Young-suk speculated that Kim Jong-un is probably raising his children the same way he was raised, with a combination of privilege, isolation, and preparation for potential leadership roles. The cycle continues with another generation of Kims being taught that they're superior beings destined to rule. Ko Young-suk expressed sadness about this because she knows firsthand how damaging that upbringing can be. These children will grow up in a bubble, unable to develop normal relationships or understand life outside the Kim family system, just like their father did. Ko Young-suk's testimony also touched on the role of China in supporting the North Korean regime. She described how the Kim family viewed China as a necessary ally but not a friend they trusted. There was always tension between wanting Chinese support and resenting Chinese influence. Kim Jong-il and later Kim Jong Un wanted China's economic help and diplomatic protection, but they didn't want China dictating North Korea's policies. This complicated relationship with China has continued under Kim Jong-un's leadership. China provides most of North Korea's trade and helps them evade international sanctions. But China also gets frustrated with North Korea's provocations and nuclear tests that destabilize the region. Ko Young-suk said that Kim Jong-un calculates that China will ultimately support North Korea because they don't want the regime to collapse and create chaos on their border. So he pushes the boundaries of what China will tolerate. Another area where Ko Young-suk provided valuable intelligence was about North Korea's weapons programs. She didn't have direct knowledge of technical details, but she described the regime's mentality around weapons development.
From the Kim family's perspective, nuclear weapons and missiles are the ultimate guarantee of survival. They watched countries like Iraq and Libya give up their weapons programs and then get invaded or overthrown. The lesson they took from this was to never, ever give up the weapons under any circumstances. Ko Young-suk said that Kim Jong-un sees the nuclear program as his greatest achievement and the foundation of his legacy. He has invested massive resources into developing more advanced weapons, even as the country's economy struggles. The weapons program isn't just about national defense in his mind. It's about proving that he's a strong leader who elevated North Korea to a major power status that his father and grandfather never achieved. This mindset is crucial for understanding why diplomacy with North Korea has been so difficult. When foreign leaders offer security guarantees or economic aid in exchange for denuclearization, they're fundamentally misunderstanding Kim Jong-un's perspective. He doesn't trust any security guarantee from countries he views as enemies. He believes that the only real guarantee is having weapons that make attacking North Korea too costly to consider. Ko Young-suk also discussed the information control system inside North Korea and how the regime maintains its grip on the population. She explained that most North Koreans have no idea how far behind the rest of the world they've fallen. The regime controls all media, all education, all information sources. People are taught that North Korea is a powerful, prosperous nation and that other countries are suffering under corrupt, evil systems. This propaganda is so effective that many North Koreans genuinely believe it. They think that they're better off than people in South Korea or other countries. When defectors reach South Korea and see the reality of the modern world for the first time, it's often traumatic because everything they believed turns out to be wrong. Ko Young-suk said the regime understands that information is the biggest threat to their control, which is why they work so hard to prevent any outside information from reaching the people. However, she also noted that this information control has been getting harder to maintain. Smuggled USB drives, illegal radios, and increasing contact with Chinese traders along the border mean that more North Koreans are being exposed to outside information. Young people particularly are starting to question the official narrative. This creates a long-term threat to the regime that Kim Jong-un is aware of, which is why punishments for possessing foreign media have become even more severe. Ko Young-suk expressed hope that this gradual information infiltration might eventually lead to change in North Korea. If enough people learn the truth about the outside world and realize how much they've been lied to, it could create pressure for reform. But she was also realistic about the regime's ability to suppress dissent through fear and violence. Change, if it comes, will probably be very slow and could take generations. The most crucial revelation from Ko Young-suk, the thing that really changed how intelligence agencies viewed Kim Jong-un, was this. She told them that he's not crazy. He's not irrational. He's not unpredictable. Everything he does makes perfect sense when you understand his worldview and incentives. Western media often portrays Kim Jong Un as an unstable madman, but Ko Young-suk explained that this is completely wrong. He's actually quite calculating and strategic. His provocations and threats are carefully calibrated to achieve specific goals. His brutal purges serve rational purposes within the logic of maintaining control. His nuclear program follows a clear strategic plan. None of it is random or impulsive. This insight fundamentally changed the approach that some policymakers took toward North Korea. If Kim Jong Un is rational rather than crazy, then you can potentially find ways to influence his decision-making by understanding his incentives and pressures. You can identify red lines he won't cross because crossing them would threaten his survival. You can look for areas where mutual interests might exist. But Ko Young-suk also warned that this rationality makes Kim Jong-un more dangerous in some ways, not less. A truly irrational leader might be talked out of destructive actions, or might make mistakes that undermine their own power. But a rational, calculating dictator who understands exactly what he's doing and why is much harder to stop or change. Kim Jong-un knows what he wants, the survival and power of his regime, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to achieve that goal. Ko Young-suk told intelligence officials that the biggest mistake the world makes is thinking Kim Jong-un can be persuaded to give up power voluntarily. She said that everything in his life, every lesson he was taught, every experience he had, reinforced one central message: power is survival. Losing power means death, not just for him, but for his entire family. She described conversations she overheard when Kim Jong-un was younger, where Kim Jong-il would talk about the fate of leaders who showed weakness. They would discuss Ceausescu in Romania, who was executed after losing power. They talked about how Gorbachev's reforms destroyed the Soviet Union. They analyzed every case of an authoritarian regime falling and drew the same conclusion every time: never compromise, never reform, never show weakness. The moment you start down that path, you're finished. This is the framework that shapes every decision Kim Jong-un makes. When he looks at diplomatic negotiations, he's not thinking about how to improve his country or help his people live better. He's thinking about whether the proposed deal makes his regime more secure or less secure. When he conducts nuclear tests, he's not trying to start a war. He's building insurance against being attacked or overthrown. When he purges officials, he's not being paranoid for no reason. He's eliminating potential threats before they become actual threats. Ko Young-suk said that understanding this mindset is essential for anyone trying to deal with North Korea. You can't appeal to humanitarian concerns because Kim Jong-un believes humanitarian concerns are luxuries that only secure regimes can afford. You can't offer economic development as an incentive because he views economic opening as a political threat. You can't promise security guarantees because he doesn't trust any promises from countries he sees as enemies. The only language he really understands, according to Ko Young-suk, is power and strength. He respects countries that can hurt North Korea and respects leaders who demonstrate they're willing to use force if necessary. This doesn't mean military threats work to change his behavior. It means he takes those threats seriously and factors them into his calculations. He's playing a chess game where his primary goal is regime survival, and every move is evaluated based on whether it helps or hurts that objective. So what did Ko Young-suk's revelations actually teach us about North Korea and Kim Jong-un? Let me pull together all the pieces we've covered. First, she gave us an understanding of Kim Jong-un as a person that nobody else could provide. She showed us how his childhood experiences shaped his personality and worldview. The constant reinforcement that he was special and superior. The tantrums when things didn't go his way that taught him anger was effective. The double life in Switzerland, where he experienced Western culture but was taught to view it as a threat. The distant relationship with his father that made him constantly seek approval. All of these factors combined to create the leader we see today. Second, she revealed the internal dynamics of the Kim family and the North Korean elite.
the paranoia and mistrust that permeates relationships at the top, the competition for favor and fear of falling out of grace, the way family members are willing to betray each other to protect their own positions, the complete disconnect between the lifestyle of the elite and the suffering of regular citizens. This insider view helps explain why the regime is so stable despite its apparent dysfunction. Third, she provided crucial intelligence about Kim Jong Un's decision-making process and strategic thinking. The fact that he's rational and calculating rather than impulsive and crazy. His belief that nuclear weapons are essential for regime survival and can never be given up. His view that showing any weakness or making compromises would put him on a path toward being overthrown. His calculation that China will ultimately support North Korea regardless of provocations. All of this information helps policymakers understand what might influence North Korean behavior and what won't. Fourth, Ko Young-suk illuminated the challenge of creating change in North Korea. She explained how the information control system keeps most citizens ignorant about the outside world, how the cult of personality makes many people genuinely believe the Kim family are special leaders, how the system of collective punishment prevents organized opposition,
how even members of the elite are trapped by fear and can't imagine alternatives. This shows why North Korea has remained so resistant to reform despite decades of international pressure. Fifth, her testimony highlighted the human cost of the Kim regime in ways that statistics and reports can't capture. She described real people she knew who disappeared into prison camps, children born into captivity who never knew freedom, families torn apart by the system of guilt by association, the daily fear and suffering that ordinary North Koreans endure, the moral corruption required to survive at the top of a system built on lies and violence. These personal stories put faces and names to the abstract concept of human rights abuses. Ko Young-suk also inadvertently revealed something about herself through her testimony: the guilt she carries for abandoning relatives who were probably punished for her defection, the moral complexity of having been part of the system even if she was trying to protect herself and her immediate family, the struggle to reconcile the affection she felt for Kim Jong Un as a child she helped raise with the horror at what he has become as a leader, the difficulty of speaking out, knowing it might endanger people she cares about who are still trapped in North Korea. Her decision to finally break her silence after 13 years came from a sense of responsibility. She had information that could help the world understand North Korea better. She could provide context that might help prevent miscalculations that could lead to war. She could give voice to the suffering of people who can't speak for themselves. The risk to her own safety seemed worth taking if it could make some small difference. The impact of her revelations on intelligence analysis and policy has been significant, though not always in obvious public ways. CIA analysts revised their psychological profiles of Kim Jong Un based on her information. Diplomats adjusted their negotiating strategies. Military planners updated their assessments of North Korean decision-making in crisis situations. Journalists and researchers used her testimony to inform their reporting and analysis. But Ko Young-suk was also realistic about the limitations of what her information could achieve. She couldn't provide technical details about weapons programs or military capabilities. She couldn't reveal the current thinking of Kim Jong Un since she hadn't seen him in decades. She couldn't predict exactly how he would respond to specific situations because people change and circumstances evolve. What she could do was provide a foundation for understanding the person and the system which others could build on with additional intelligence and analysis. One of the most poignant aspects of her story is what it reveals about the price of defecting from North Korea, especially for someone from inside the system. Ko Young-suk gained physical freedom and safety for herself and her immediate family. She got to live in a free society where she could make her own choices and speak her mind. But she lost everything and everyone she left behind. Her parents, her siblings, extended family, friends, anyone connected to her faced severe punishment. She lives with the knowledge that her escape probably resulted in relatives being sent to prison camps where they suffered and possibly died. That's a psychological burden that never goes away. Every day of freedom comes with the weight of knowing the price others paid for it.
This is the calculation that prevents most potential defectors from leaving. The regime has structured the system so that escape means condemning your loved ones. It's an effective way to keep people trapped. Ko Young-suk also can never fully escape her past, even living in America. She has to maintain a low profile because North Korea has demonstrated its willingness to assassinate high-profile defectors anywhere in the world. She probably changes her routines regularly, worries about being recognized, thinks twice about going to public places. The freedom she gained is real but limited by ongoing security concerns. Her daughter, who was young when they fled, grew up American but carries the burden of her family's history. She has to navigate questions about her background, lives with the knowledge that she has relatives in North Korea she'll probably never meet, and deals with the psychological impact of her mother's trauma. The effects of the Kim regime reach across generations and across continents. Ko Young-suk's story also raises uncomfortable questions about responsibility and complicity. She was part of the system that oppresses millions of North Koreans. She benefited from privileges while others starved. She helped raise and educate Kim Jong Un, who has gone on to commit terrible atrocities. Does she bear some responsibility for that? She would probably say that she was trapped by circumstances beyond her control, that she did what she had to do to survive, that she couldn't have changed the system even if she tried. These are the moral complexities that exist in authoritarian systems. Most people aren't heroes or villains. They're ordinary people making difficult choices in impossible situations. Ko Young-suk tried to protect herself and her family. She probably compromised and looked the other way and participated in things she wasn't proud of. Then she reached a point where she couldn't continue and made the incredibly difficult decision to flee. She's neither purely a victim nor purely complicit. She's human, which means she's both. The broader lesson from her story is about how authoritarian regimes function and persist. They're not maintained primarily through ideology or popular support. They're maintained through carefully structured systems of fear, privilege, and control. People at the top get benefits that make them reluctant to risk change. People in the middle are too scared of punishment to organize resistance. People at the bottom are kept ignorant about alternatives and focused on basic survival. This combination creates stability even when the system is obviously failing the majority of people. North Korea under Kim Jong Un continues to demonstrate this dynamic. The regime has survived multiple crises, international sanctions, economic hardship, and the death of its previous leaders. It has adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its core control mechanisms. Ko Young-suk's testimony helps explain why the system is so resilient. It's not accident or luck. It's the result of deliberate design refined over 3 generations of Kim family rule.
Her revelations also highlight the challenge facing anyone who wants to promote change in North Korea. You can't appeal to the better nature of the leadership, because the system selects for people who prioritize power over morality. You can't expect internal reform, because anyone who tries to reform gets purged. You can't hope that information alone will create revolution, because the regime has powerful tools to suppress dissent. The system is designed to perpetuate itself and has proven very effective at doing so. Does this mean change is impossible? Ko Young-suk didn't think so, but she believed it would require circumstances beyond just international pressure or information infiltration. Perhaps a major economic crisis that the regime can't manage. Perhaps a succession struggle after Kim Jong Un dies or becomes incapacitated. Perhaps a military coup by generals who decide the current path is unsustainable. Perhaps a gradual erosion of control as more people are exposed to outside information and lose faith in the system. Change might come from any of these directions or from something unexpected. But Ko Young-suk was clear that change wouldn't come from Kim Jong Un voluntarily giving up power or reforming the system. He's too invested in the current structure and too convinced that any opening would lead to the regime's collapse.
His worldview, shaped by his upbringing and reinforced by decades of propaganda, doesn't allow for peaceful transformation. From his perspective, he's fighting for survival, and that makes him willing to do terrible things to maintain control. The tragedy is that this fight for regime survival comes at enormous cost to the North Korean people. They suffer from poverty, malnutrition, lack of freedom, and constant fear because Kim Jong Un believes that's necessary to keep his family in power. 25 million people are held hostage to one family's determination to maintain their position. The scale of suffering is almost incomprehensible. Ko Young-suk's testimony serves as a reminder that behind all the geopolitical analysis and strategic discussions about North Korea, there are real human beings experiencing real suffering. Every policy decision should be evaluated not just on its strategic implications, but on its impact on those millions of trapped people. This doesn't mean the international community should appease the regime or ignore its threats. It means that any approach to North Korea should keep the welfare of its people as a central consideration. Her story also reminds us that even in the darkest systems, individuals can make choices that matter. Ko Young-suk chose to flee rather than continue serving the regime. She chose to speak out rather than remain silent. These were difficult, dangerous choices that required courage. Other North Koreans make similar choices every day. People who hide USB drives with foreign media, people who help others escape, people who share information despite the risks, people who maintain their humanity in a system designed to crush it. The Kim regime wants everyone to believe that resistance is futile, that change is impossible, that the current system is eternal. Ko Young-suk's defection and testimony prove that's not true. The system can be challenged. Information can get out. The truth can be told. These might seem like small victories against an overwhelming oppressor, but they matter. They matter to the people who hear them and realize they're not alone. They matter to the historical record that will eventually judge the Kim regime. They matter as acts of resistance that deny the regime total control. Looking forward, Ko Young-suk's revelations will continue to inform how the world deals with North Korea. Analysts and policymakers now have a much clearer picture of Kim Jong Un as a person and leader. They understand his motivations, his fears, his strategic thinking. This doesn't make solving the North Korea problem easy. The fundamental challenges remain. But it does allow for more informed approaches based on realistic assessments rather than misconceptions. The question of what will ultimately happen to North Korea remains unanswered. Will the regime eventually collapse under the weight of its own dysfunction? Will Kim Jong Un die or be overthrown, creating a succession crisis? Will gradual information infiltration eventually erode the system from within? Will China's support continue indefinitely? Or will Beijing eventually decide the regime is more trouble than it's worth? Will there be a war that destroys the current system? Nobody knows. What we do know, thanks in large part to Ko Young-suk, is more about how the regime thinks and operates. We know that Kim Jong Un is rational within his own framework, even if that framework seems irrational to outsiders. We know that the regime prioritizes its own survival above everything else. We know that it's willing to sacrifice its people's welfare to maintain control. We know that it views nuclear weapons as existential insurance. We know that it doesn't trust security guarantees or promises from other countries. This knowledge doesn't give us easy answers, but it does help us ask better questions. What incentives might actually influence North Korean behavior? What red lines should we avoid crossing that might trigger desperate actions? Where might be opportunities for engagement that don't threaten regime survival? How can we support the North Korean people without inadvertently strengthening the regime? These are complex questions without simple solutions, but Ko Young-suk's testimony at least helps us approach them with better understanding. Her legacy, beyond the specific intelligence she provided, is showing that even the most secretive regimes can't completely control their narrative. Information eventually escapes. The truth eventually emerges. The walls they build to hide reality eventually develop cracks. North Korea has spent decades trying to maintain perfect control over information about the Kim family. But one woman's decision to flee and speak out pierced that veil of secrecy in important ways. This gives hope that other information will continue to emerge. Other defectors will share their stories. Other insiders will reveal secrets. The cumulative effect of these revelations will make it harder and harder for the regime to maintain their carefully constructed myths. The North Korean people deserve to know the truth about their leadership and their country.
The world deserves to understand what's really happening behind the propaganda. Ko Young-suk contributed significantly to both of these goals. The personal cost she paid for this contribution was enormous. The relatives she left behind, the guilt she carries, the ongoing security concerns, the loss of her homeland and culture, the trauma of her experiences. These are prices that can never be fully compensated, but she apparently decided that speaking out was worth those costs if it could help create understanding and maybe contribute in some small way to eventual change in North Korea. Her story is ultimately about courage in the face of overwhelming power. The courage to escape from a system that had given her privileges because she couldn't morally continue participating in it. The courage to speak out despite years of successfully hiding because she felt an obligation to share what she knew. The courage to keep living with the consequences of those decisions, both the freedom she gained and the losses she suffered. Ko Young-suk didn't single-handedly change the course of history. She didn't bring down the Kim regime or free the North Korean people. But she added to the accumulation of knowledge and testimony that challenges the regime's control of information. She provided insights that help the world better understand one of the most difficult foreign policy challenges of our time. She gave voice to experiences and observations that would otherwise have remained hidden. That matters. Hit subscribe to see more untold stories like this.